You won't believe this. I was in London, right, central London. Went into a coffee shop the other day.
Oh, yeah. What happened? Run out of Earl Grey.
Huh, worse. So I'm just trying to order a latte. Simple enough, you'd think. The barista, she spoke English fine.
Okay.
But then she needs to check the milk type, gets pulled away by someone else, who then starts speaking to me in Spanish, trying to translate the order, I guess.
Seriously, in Spanish?
Yeah. And then the guy who actually made the coffee sounded like he was speaking Romanian to his buddy behind the counter. I mean, seriously, like 5 different nationalities for one coffee order.
Okay, that's actually kind of funny. Did you actually get the latte in the end? Or some weird international beverage experiment?
Well, I paid for a latte, honestly. By the time I got it, I wasn't totally sure what it was. But hey, it had caffeine, it was hot. In London these days, maybe that's a win.
You know, that whole chaotic coffee situation, it actually, perfectly sets the stage for what we need to talk about today. There's this feeling bubbling up again online, globally even. This phrase, Britain is doomed.
Oh, I've seen that. Yeah, you definitely feel that anxiety. And it seems like it's coming from 2 different places at once, almost. Both eating away at things.
Exactly. 2 crises hitting at the same time. First, you've got the trouble in the castles, the institutions. King Charles making some really, cold, hard decisions.
You mean with Prince Andrew?
Yeah. Stripping him of his titles, forcing him out of the Royal Lodge. It's pretty brutal, but it feels like a desperate move, trying to stop the bleeding from that whole Epstein scandal fallout. The trust crisis.
Right. And then the second crisis is, literally on the streets. The conflict. Mm-hmm. These ethnic tensions just escalating. You hear about these planned clashes in Whitechapel.
Yeah.
In Tower Hamlets. Anti-immigrant groups basically facing off against, thousands of local Muslim counter-protesters. Yeah. So you put the royal decay next to that chaos on the streets. It kind of feels like this empire that used to run the world is just losing its footing, its whole sense of self.
The irony is just...
joyous.
Well, the monarchy, right. For centuries, it was this symbol of stability, British glory, all that.
Unshakable.
And now, it's almost like a symbol of the division. They're having to, turn on their own family members just to keep the public somewhat on board.
Damage control.
Totally. The government, the royals, they put out statements, they strip titles.
Yeah.
But you can't fix the stuff underneath with a press release, can you? The cultural clashes, the feeling that maybe the shared rules are breaking down, the fact that communities are living separately, that's way deeper.
Which brings us to that split view, doesn't it? Some people are saying, look, the UK isn't being beaten by enemies, it's being swallowed by its own diversity. Maybe too much, too fast.
But then you flip it, right? Like your coffee shop. If all those immigrants, the 5 nationalities making your latte, if they all left tomorrow.
Oh, London would grind to a halt, the tube wouldn't run.
And the NHS? Forget about it. The health service would just collapse. The UK absolutely depends on migrant workers to function. Day-to-day stuff.
So this whole UK is doomed feeling, whether you buy it or not, it's like holding up a mirror to the whole world, isn't it?
It really is. It taps into this global anxiety. What happens when globalization just moves too fast? When change outpaces our ability to, integrate people? Right. And what does that look like in different places? Because it's not the same everywhere.
Right.
And that's really what we want to unpack today here on Sip and Talk. We're going beyond just the UK headlines, the royal gossip, the street clashes.
We'll definitely get into those specifics.
Oh, yeah. But we want to look at the bigger picture. Immigration impact and integration failure globally.
So we'll start digging into those UK issues, the crown, the streets. Then we'll pivot completely. Look at Japan. Super strict culture, right? High pressure to conform.
Uniformity, yeah. Then we'll zoom out. Touch on the U.S. border situation, the anxieties there.
Yeah.
Then Hong Kong, this really concerning idea of an identity blood swap happening.
Wow, okay.
And finally, we'll even explore a really extreme hypothetical. What could happen culturally, structurally, if there was a massive mainland Chinese influx into Taiwan after some kind of takeover scenario?
Okay, so the big question hanging over all of this is, when we open the doors, are we thinking about how much of what makes a place home, the shared culture, the identity, can change before it's just gone?
Exactly. So today's topic is Britain falling apart when diversity turns into division. Let's dive in.
All right, let's start with the royals then. This Prince Andrew situation. You said Charles's decision was brutal, but maybe necessary.
Necessary seems like the right word, yeah. For the survival of the institution, maybe not the family feeling. The king basically set in motion this really formal, probably excruciating process to strip Andrew of all his titles, honors, the lot.
So he's just Andrew Mountbatten Windsor now.
Pretty much. No more His Royal Highness.
Yeah.
No taxpayer-funded security detail tied to that status. And, crucially, he had to pack his bags and leave Royal Lodge, that huge place near Windsor Castle. It's symbolic.
And this all goes back to the Epstein scandal, right? The accusations from Virginia Giuffre.
Directly. She alleged, that she was forced into sexual contact with Andrew when she was underage as part of Epstein's network. Andrew's denied it all, consistently.
And the damage was done?
Completely. The public scrutiny, the photos of him with Epstein, the evidence showing he stayed in contact with Epstein until, 2011. That's long after Epstein's first conviction, long after Andrew claimed he'd cut ties. He just became this massive liability, financially, reputationally, everything.
So what's the deeper takeaway here? How the monarchy is changing?
Well, yeah, I think that's the interesting part. Historically, the royals always prioritized, family protection, protecting the line. Think about Edward VIII. They exiled him to protect the throne's integrity, right? Harsh, but about the family line.
Okay.
Charles's move feels different. It's colder. More like corporate systemic preservation. He basically threw his own brother under the bus to protect the system's image as, a moral institution, sacrificing the individual for the brand.
Wow. Damage control for a 1,000-year-old dynasty. Like a PR strategy.
Pretty much. And the fact that this is the first time a prince has been formally stripped of titles like this since way back in 1919, that tells you how serious they think the situation is.
It sends a message.
Definitely. It says titles aren't guaranteed anymore. They're a privilege you can lose if you threaten the whole system's image.
And the public mood backs that up, right? Support for the monarchy isn't what it used to be.
Not even close. It's plummeted. Back in the 80s, it was 86% approval. Now, 2023 figures put it around 54%. That's a massive drop.
So Charles had to act?
He had no choice, really. Public trust is basically the only thing keeping the monarchy relevant now. And the optics of Andrew living it up in Royal Lodge, funded by taxpayers, while facing those accusations, it was just killing that trust. Too fast.
Okay, so the royals are trying to clean house, basically. A painful self-purge to stay afloat. But while they're doing that inside the castles, things are getting messy outside on the pavement. Which brings us to Whitechapel.
Right. The Whitechapel conflict in Tower Hamlets. If you want a snapshot of diversity tipping into, outright division, this is it. The spark was this march planned by UKIP, the UK Independence Party, led by a guy named Nick Tinconi.
UKIP, okay. They're pretty far-right anti-immigration.
Yeah, and the march was literally called a crusade to reclaim Whitechapel. His words. Reclaim it from what he called Islamists.
A crusade? Wow, that's loaded language.
Especially given Tinconi's own history, right? Didn't he get caught doing Nazi salutes or something?
He did, yeah. Filmed doing it, and he's openly called for mass deportations. So choosing that word crusade and picking Whitechapel, he knew exactly what he was doing. He picked a place where the demographics alone guaranteed a reaction, probably a violent one.
You really need to understand those demographics, don't you? Whitechapel isn't just any London neighborhood.
Not at all. It's in Tower Hamlets, which has one of the highest Muslim populations in the entire UK. The 2021 census said 39.9%, but everyone reckons it's much higher now. And get this. 64% of the people living there are foreign-born, mostly Bangladeshi immigrants. 64%. So the original English or British population is now
tiny, a real minority. Estimates are around 8 to 10% identify that way. It's become its own kind of self-contained world. Even the tube station signs there have Bengali on them.
Right. So Tinconi announces his crusade into this area with maybe 100 supporters.
What happened? Did the police let them march?
No way. The Met Police stepped in fast. They basically said they feared severe disorder, which is probably an understatement. They used the Public Order Act to ban the UKIP march from even entering Tower Hamlets, diverted them somewhere else entirely, like Knightsbridge. Much wider area.
Because they knew who would be waiting in Whitechapel.
Exactly. They were expecting thousands of counter-protesters, groups like Stand Up to Racism, SUTR, and also this group called the Muslim Defense League, the MDL. Sounds pretty militant.
Okay, so thousands turn up to counter-protest UKIP. But here's where it gets really interesting, right? They weren't all on the same page.
Not even slightly. That's what was so revealing. It showed these huge cracks, these fault lines within the supposed anti-far-right movement itself.
Well, you had the Muslim Defense League, the MDL, show up, big groups organized. Reports said they were masked, mostly dressed in black, chanting Allahu Akbar, chanting whose streets, our streets. Some described them as looking almost like a, disciplined militia. But then you had the other main group, SUTR. stand up to racism. They're more like radical left-wing activists, chanting, welcome refugees, pushing standard progressive liberal ideas.
And they didn't mix.
No. There was this visible separation, like an informal segregation right there on the street, enforced by the groups themselves. And apparently, MDL members actually told the SUTR activists, point blank, we are not the same side.
Wow. We are not the same side. That says it all, doesn't it?
It really does. It highlights this massive, maybe unbridgeable gap in modern progressive politics. You've got the liberal left championing things like LGBTQ rights, secularism, trying to ally with socially conservative religious communities, like many in the Muslim community there.
And the values just clash.
Fundamentally. The left wants to use these communities as kind of a political force against the establishment. But the conservative religious groups are saying, hold on, we're not signing up for your whole progressive agenda just because we both dislike UKIP. They refuse to be co-opted if it compromises their core beliefs.
So it's this alliance falling apart. And that feeds right back into that wider anxiety we talked about. The Britain is doomed feeling, often linked to population replacement.
Directly. That anxiety, it's fueled by some pretty stark numbers.
Yeah.
The main thing is just the sheer scale of net migration. It's been projected to stay over 700,000 people per year.
700,000 net. That's huge.
Massive. And that fuels genuine fears. Maybe legitimate fears, depending on your view about population replacement in certain areas, where the original local population starts to feel like strangers in their own town, culturally marginalized, squeezed economically, and, yeah, resentful. Especially if it feels like low-skilled migration is just draining resources without boosting the economy much.
And then you layer on the stories about social breakdown, the stuff that grabs headlines.
Right, the constant linking you see in parts of the media, and definitely online, between large-scale immigration and rising crime. Especially visible stuff like street violence, knife crime in cities.
And we have to mention the grooming gangs issue too, right? It's incredibly sensitive, but it's part of that narrative.
We do, and it's crucial to be precise here. Statistically, overall, white people commit the most sex crimes in the UK, by volume. That's clear.
Okay.
However, in those specific horrific grooming gang cases that came out of places like Rotherham and Telford, the data was undeniable and deeply disturbing. In those specific gangs, South Asian Muslim men were massively, disproportionately overrepresented, like up to 84% of the perpetrators in some of those networks.
84% in those specific cases.
Yeah. And when the victims were often young, vulnerable, working-class white girls, that specific pattern, even if it's not representative of all crime, becomes incredibly toxic. It just fuels the fire.
Combine that with the economic strain, pressure on housing, pressure on the NHS, and the feeling that Native young people are getting pushed out.
It creates this complete breakdown of trust. Trust in the institutions that are supposed to manage things, protect people, uphold a shared identity.
So the conclusion some observers are drawing is the UK is becoming a kind of warning sign for Europe.
That's exactly the language being used by some international analysts. A European warning, showing what happens when you embrace diversity at a speed and scale that just completely swamps the country's ability to cope. Institutionally, culturally, the infrastructure creaks, the social fabric tears.
A grim picture. Unchecked speed leading to fragmentation. Okay, so if that's the UK model, high tolerance for chaos, maybe too much speed, what's the opposite? What happens in a society deliberately engineered to minimize friction?
Well, then you have to look at Japan.
The ultimate high norm culture.
Couldn't be more different from the UK. Where Britain seems to tolerate, even generate social friction and conflict, Japanese society is built on principles designed to stamp it out. You have wa, that's harmony, chitsujo, order, and gammon, endurance, putting up with things for the collective good.
It's like a cultural operating system.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it dictates almost everything in public, which makes it incredibly hard for people from more individualistic, high-friction cultures to fit in.
And the classic example everyone talks about is smoking while walking, right? Aruki tobacco. You learn that's a huge no-no almost immediately as a tourist.
Huge. It's more than just impolite. It's a massive social taboo. And it's actually illegal in over 50 cities, including all of Tokyo's main wards since 2002.
Illegal? Like fines?
Yeah, but the fines themselves are pretty small, like 1,000 or 2,000 yen, maybe 10 or 20 bucks. The real enforcement isn't the police. It's the social pressure, the stares, the public shaming. Someone might actually come up and tell you off.
Why is that one specific thing, walking and smoking, such a big deal there?
Well, there are actually 4 pretty rational reasons, which kind of show you how the Japanese prioritize the collective. First, safety. Walking with a lit cigarette in crowded streets. Easy to burn someone, especially a child. or get ash in someone's eye.
Okay, makes sense.
Secondhand smoke on narrow sidewalks. Third, pollution. Tokyo City estimates they clean up 4 million cigarette butts off the streets every year. 4 million.
Wow.
And fourth, maybe the most subtle one, it just clashes with the image, that carefully crafted image of clean Japan. Smoking while walking looks messy, inconsiderate.
Now, when you hear about foreigners breaking this rule, the stereotype is always mainland Chinese tourists, right? Because there are so many of them and maybe perceived differences in etiquette.
That's the stereotype, yeah. But the actual data tells a slightly different story. Tokyo did a survey looking ahead to 2025 on who was actually caught doing Aruki tobacco. Chinese tourists and students were a big chunk, about 31%.
Okay, significant.
But the largest group was labeled unidentified foreigners, 38%. And that category usually includes people like Southeast Asian workers, European backpackers. So it's less about one nationality and more about anyone coming from a culture where that's just not a thing. It's a behavior issue.
Which explains why the stories you hear are quite varied.
Totally. There was that viral story about a blonde backpacker, looked European, getting absolutely yelled at by a Japanese salaryman right in Shibuya Crossing. "The ground is not an ashtray," he apparently shouted.
Huh. I can picture that.
Yeah. Or the Taiwanese couple reportedly refused service in a shop near Kiyomizudera Temple in Kyoto just because they were smoking while walking nearby. And there are tons of videos online shaming Chinese students for breaking smoking rules or being too loud. The message is crystal clear. Follow our rules or you will be corrected publicly.
So it's not xenophobia necessarily. It's breaking law, breaking the harmony.
Exactly. And smoking is just one rule. There's this whole list, sometimes called the 10 iron rules of daily Japanese life. What else trips foreigners up?
The quietness, right. That's a big one.
Huge. No loud talking on trains, buses, even in many restaurants. Don't talk on your phone in public transport. It's about respecting that shared space. They say noise levels should ideally be below 30 decibels in those places. That's quieter than a library. Completely different from cultures where public space feels like fair game for noise.
And the queuing. I hear the queuing is sacred.
Oh, absolutely sacrosanct. Strict, single-file lines, no cutting, no matter how long it takes. Then there's the garbage sorting.
Oh, yeah.
Mandatory. And complex, often more than 10 different categories. Burnables, non-burnables, plastic, PET bottles, glass, cans, cardboard. And you better not mix them up. Your neighbors will know.
10 categories. Wow.
And just generally, no eating while walking. It's seen as kind of low class or uneducated. You buy street food, you stand near the stall to eat it.
Okay, so given how many visitors Japan gets, especially from mainland China, these clashes must happen all the time and go viral. What are some of the big ones?
Oh, yeah. The viral incidents are legendary. We found a kind of top 5 list based on reports. Number 1, queue jumping. A whole Chinese tour group, like 20 people, just collectively pushed past elderly Japanese people waiting for a bus in Kyoto, cut the whole line.
No way.
Yep. Video went viral. The bus company apparently even stopped selling group tickets for a while. It just fundamentally violates Chitsujo, that sense of order.
That's incredibly brazen. Yeah. What else?
Number 2, the onsen incident. A big tour group wore swimsuit bikinis into a traditional hot spring bath in Hakone.
Ah, supposed to be naked, right, for cleanliness and tradition.
Exactly. Mandatory nudity. This caused such an uproar, the Onsen Association had to put up special warning signs in simplified Chinese, explicitly showing no swimsuits.
Okay, so violations of order, violations of tradition. What about just like daily living stuff?
Number 3 fits that. An immigrant from Beijing living in a shared apartment building. He kept throwing his trash, like lunch containers and food waste, into the wrong bins. Messed up the whole building's strict collection schedule.
What happened?
The building management put up a sign specifically saying, "Warning for Chinese residents only." And eventually he got evicted. Shows how social pressure can escalate to real consequences.
So even without police, breaking the rules can seriously impact your life.
Absolutely. And sensory stuff matters too. Number 4. A tourist from Shanghai got filmed eating super pungent stinky tofu on the Yamanote Line train in Tokyo.
Oh no, on a packed commuter train.
Yeah, the whole carriage was apparently holding their noses, complaining. Japanese commuters even started a specific hashtag online just about the smell violation on the train.
Using social media to enforce smell rules, that's dedication.
It is. And finally, number 5, flash photography. A tour group from Guangzhou apparently went wild with flash photos inside Kinkakuji, the Golden Pavilion Temple in Kyoto. A monk reportedly got so angry he physically took their phones away.
Wow. So why is it that some groups, like mainland Chinese according to the data, seem to struggle so much more with integration compared to others, say, Taiwanese immigrants, who seem to adapt much better?
It seems to be a mix of structural and cultural factors. The data shows only about 27% of Chinese immigrants feel fully adapted to Japan. For Taiwanese immigrants, it's 78%. That's a huge gap.
Why such a difference?
Well, the cultural distance is arguably much bigger. Chinese culture heavily emphasizes things like mianzi, which is saving face, and guangxi.
Guangxi. That's like the system of personal connections and favors, right? Getting things done through who you know.
Exactly. It's flexible, relationship-based. And that runs completely counter to Japan's system, which is built on rigid, impersonal rules and social contracts. Chitsujo. A system based on bending rules through personal favors just doesn't mesh well with a society built on following strict universal rules.
Okay.
Plus, there seems to be an education gap. One survey found only 12% of Chinese tourists had actually read any guide about Japanese manners before visiting. Often they're on these cheap, rushed package tours where the guides are just focused on hitting the shops, not teaching etiquette.
So the takeaway on Japan is pretty stark then. It's not necessarily anti-foreigner, but it is intensely high norm.
Extremely. As one sociologist put it, Japan doesn't hate foreigners. It hates those who break wa. The friction comes from breaking the harmony, the rules. It's cultural, not racial. If you don't respect those iron rules, you're going to feel unwelcome. You'll get the silent stare.
Welcome, but learn our rules. Okay, so from Japan's rigid order, let's swing back to the U.S., the classic melting pot. How is that model holding up under these global migration shockwaves?
Well, the U.S. is this huge paradox, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
On one hand, immigration is undeniably a massive economic plus. Immigrants are hugely entrepreneurial. Something like 40% of Silicon Valley founders are immigrants or children of immigrants.
Right, innovation drives growth.
Absolutely. And they fill critical jobs that, frankly, many native-born Americans don't want. Construction, agriculture, hospitality, care work. They keep huge parts of the economy running.
But that positive story feels completely drowned out right now by the politics around the border, doesn't it?
It really does. The situation, just in terms of numbers and logistics, is overwhelming. You've had this incredible surge in undocumented immigration. Estimates are over 3.3 million encounters or crossings between 2021 and 2024 alone.
3.3 million in just a few years. The strain on resources must be immense.
It is immediate, massive strain on social services, on local school budgets, on housing, healthcare, especially in border states and big cities like New York, Chicago, Denver.
You hear about cities spending billions just trying to cope.
They are. Hundreds of millions, heading towards billions annually, just on emergency shelters and basic services for new arrivals. And that diversion of resources becomes intensely political. It feeds directly into this growing national identity crisis. Is the melting pot idea still working when the influx feels so fast, so overwhelming?
And the political fighting over policies like Title 42 or Remain in Mexico just shows how divided the country is on who belongs and how to manage it.
Exactly. Deep, deep polarization. Okay, so if the U.S. is struggling with quantity and political gridlock, Hong Kong is facing something different, more structural, almost existential. This concept analysts are calling identity blood swap, one Hewitt.
One Hewitt. That sounds chilling. What does it mean?
It basically describes this two-way demographic pressure cooker. First, you have this significant outflow of local Hong Kongers, especially skilled working-age people. Estimates suggest around 354,000 left between 2018 and 2024. They're looking for political freedom, maybe better opportunities elsewhere, post-national security law.
Okay, so locals leaving. And the second part
is the deliberate, often state-encouraged influx of mainland Chinese immigrants in capital to fill that gap. Think about the huge Greater Bay Area initiatives connecting Hong Kong more closely with the mainland.
So it's not just people moving, it's money, too.
Big time. Mainland investment is pouring in, especially at the high end. Luxury property prices, like places over 50 million Hong Kong dollars, have shot up. That makes inequality worse, pushes regular locals out of the market.
But you said it's about identity. Is it mainly cultural?
That's the core of it, yes.
Right.
It feels like a deliberate strategy of cultural dilution and political realignment. You see, Mandarin becoming more dominant than Cantonese in business, even in schools. There's a shift in values being pushed. The whole political system is being reshaped. The local Hong Kong identity is literally being swamped, replaced, restructured by this demographic shift. It's like replacement theory, but playing out for real, driven by policy, culturally, demographically, economically.
That is deeply unsettling.
Yeah.
Okay, let's shift back to Europe for a moment. You mentioned visible consequences of migration, especially when it's maybe unregulated or integration isn't working. The impact on tourism, street crime.
This is something you see and feel very directly in many big Western cities. When you have large numbers of people arriving, perhaps without legal status, without language skills, without clear paths to jobs, some inevitably turn to low-level but highly visible crime to survive.
And that erodes trust fast.
Instantly, especially when it hits the tourism sector, which is vital for local economies. It creates this negative feedback loop.
Paris often gets singled out for this, right? Especially around the big landmarks.
It does. The Eiffel Tower area, Montmartre, notorious for things like the friendship bracelet scam.
Oh, I've heard of that.
Yeah, usually unlicensed migrants, often from Africa. They'll approach tourists, sometimes targeting kids or older people, forcefully tie a cheap woven bracelet on your wrist, and then demand money, often quite aggressively.
It sounds minor, but if it happens constantly...
It ruins the experience, makes people feel unsafe, harassed, and it feeds that narrative. Look, the city's out of control. The Paris police apparently confiscate something like 20 tons of fake souvenirs, mini Eiffel Towers, stuff like that every year, often sold by the same groups. It just makes the problem look huge and visible.
And Rome has its own version of this, right? Especially on the buses.
Oh, yeah. Rome's famous for a couple of things. Near the Colosseum, you get the fake gladiators charging tourists outrageous amounts for a photo. But the really pervasive thing is the pickpocketing. Bacchi, they call it. Especially on the number 64 bus.
The 64 goes between the main station and the Vatican. I've heard it called the Pickpocket Express.
That's the one. It's notorious. Often involves highly organized networks. Reports frequently mention Eastern European groups, Roma networks, who are incredibly skilled at working the dense crowds on the bus, targeting overwhelmed tourists.
So whether it's scams in Paris or pickpockets in Rome.
The effect on public perception is the same. It creates this powerful, easily understood story. Loose immigration equals deteriorating safety. Doesn't matter what complex arguments NGOs make about poverty or lack of opportunity, what people see and feel is disorder. And they link it to immigration.
Okay. Which brings us, chillingly, to the most extreme scenario we outlined. Using that Hong Kong blood swap idea as a potential precursor, what might happen in Taiwan? If there were ever a hypothetical invasion or takeover followed by a massive influx from mainland China.
Right. If that political reality shifted and you saw a huge, rapid movement of mainland Chinese people into Taiwan, whether deliberately engineered by Beijing or just happening naturally post-takeover, the consequences would be, well, immediate and catastrophic on multiple levels, way beyond what Hong Kong is experiencing.
Let's start with the economy. We know Taiwan's critical for tech.
Critical is an understatement. A takeover scenario, even without fighting, could mean the destruction or complete disruption of TSMC and the semiconductor supply chain. That alone would likely trigger a global depression. Stop tech innovation dead in its tracks, cause worldwide panic.
Okay, global economic chaos. What about inside Taiwan?
Instant resource collapse. Imagine potentially millions of new people arriving quickly on an already densely populated island. Housing, food supplies, energy grid, water. Everything would be strained to the absolute breaking point, probably beyond. Just basic survival would become incredibly difficult for the existing population.
And then the political and cultural side, this sounds like the core strategy, based on the Hong Kong example.
It would be the long-term goal, absolutely.
Yeah.
You'd likely see a swift, total replacement of the local Taiwanese political leadership, democratic institutions dismantled, obviously. But the deeper change would be cultural assimilation. Forced.
How would that work?
Ordinary life gets completely restructured. Language policy changes, Mandarin enforced. Local Taiwanese dialects may be suppressed. Education curriculum rewritten to fit Beijing's narrative. Media landscape totally controlled. Legal system overhauled. It's about erasing the distinct Taiwanese identity and replacing it with the mainland's political and cultural norms, imposed by the sheer weight of the new population.
And that influx itself would be a security tool, wouldn't it? Making resistance harder.
Precisely. Any large influx would almost certainly include huge numbers of undercover security agents, party cadres, intelligence operatives, posing as regular migrants or workers.
What would their job be?
So chaos, basically. Identify and neutralize potential resistance leaders. Destabilize existing social networks. Make the transition to mainland control smooth and easy. It's arguably the most effective way to occupy a place long-term without a massive military presence. You just change who lives there until the original identity is diluted into irrelevance. Game over.
It's quite chilling when you trace that thread From a chaotic London coffee shop, through Japan's rigid rules, Hong Kong's demographic shift, right up to that extreme Taiwan hypothetical. The common factor isn't the people themselves, is it? It seems to be about the structures, the capacity, and crucially, the speed of change.
That really seems to be the core issue everywhere you look, whether it's the UK, Japan, the US, Hong Kong. If you open the doors wide, but you don't have the institutions, the shared cultural agreement, the integration mechanisms to handle the influx at the speed it's happening,
then diversity starts to look like division.
Exactly. If you don't create shared rules or enforce the ones you have, if you don't manage the economic impacts, if you don't deal with the visible signs of disorder like street crime, then the social fabric starts to fray, regardless of how well-intentioned the policies might be initially.
So maybe a final thought for everyone listening, something to mull over. When we talk about open doors, globalization, welcoming people, are we also asking what percentage of home, that shared feeling, the culture, the way things work, are we willing to see change, maybe lose, before it stops feeling like home? It's not about hating newcomers, is it? It's maybe about preserving what defines the U.S. that's doing the welcoming.
That puts it perfectly. It's the incredibly uncomfortable but absolutely central dilemma facing pretty much every developed nation on the planet right now.
Well, that wraps up our discussion for today's Sip and Talk. We asked if Britain is falling apart, and I think the big takeaway is that stability everywhere really seems to depend on managing the speed of change and integrating newcomers successfully without losing that core cultural coherence.
And as always, we've aimed to lay out the information, the different perspectives, as objectively as we can. We really encourage you to think critically, look at the facts yourself, and form your own conclusions. We're just here to present the analysis.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for tuning in to this pretty intense exploration. Please do subscribe to Sip and Talk wherever you get your podcasts so you don't miss our future discussions.
And hey, quick shout out to our good friend Mickey. Check out his YouTube channel, Mickytolife. He's got some really fun travel vlogs, funny memes, good stuff over there. Mickytolife on YouTube.
Definitely check him out. All right, everyone. Thanks again.
We'll see you next time.